of Natural Resources this morning. She is going to talk about something that I've been really wanting to hear about for quite a while. She's going to be talking about dam removal, the effects of dam removal, and the benefits of that removal. And as you might have heard in our banter just before we got going here, it seems like there's more and more interest in this area across the state and across the country. I know I've been hearing more about it, and it's going to be really interesting to hear a take from Amy, who has been involved with this for quite a while, and tell us about this. Amy is the training and outreach coordinator with the DNR's River Ecology Unit since 2007. She earned her master's degree and doctorate in chemical oceanography from the University of Alaska at Fairbanks. I would not have imagined that University of Alaska Fairbanks had a doctorate in chemical oceanography, so that's an interesting thing. Her responsibilities include coordinating various training opportunities, developing outreach materials, including publications and websites, and assisting with field work. Amy, it is really good to have you with us this morning. Take it away. The floor is yours.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. How does that look?
That looks great.
Okay. All right. Well, good morning, and thank you for joining us today, and thank you for inviting our group to come talk about this. This very exciting, it's very challenging, but very rewarding area of research that we're area of river restoration that we're involved in. So yeah, I'm the training and outreach coordinator for our river ecology unit. I have been in this position for 15 years. So today I'll be talking about the effects of dams and the benefits of dam removal. This is just a real brief overview of my what I'll be covering today. I just thought I'd introduce our river ecology unit and the staff in our unit. For those that aren't familiar, then I'll be going over the various impacts of dams on our river systems, and going over some dam removal and modification options that we use out there on the landscape. And then I'll wrap it up with some research that we have to show the benefits that that these dam removals have for the fish community. I had to put a picture up. This is one of our favorites. We look so good out there in front of Minnesota Falls as it was being removed. It was a very cold day, and we were had to wear our safety gear. So we feel like we look pretty good in that picture. So that's Neil Haugerud and Amanda Hillman in the middle, and that's me on the right. So, and I'll be talking about this project later in the talk. So just real quick, this is the River Ecology Unit is in the Division of Ecological and Water Resources and within the section of Inventory, Monitoring, and Analysis. So our unit has 23 full-time staff, and we're situated in Fergus Falls, Central Office, St. Paul, and Lake City. We kind of have these general areas of research that we're involved in: geomorphology research, river restoration, fish habitat work, mussel research, mussel propagation, the long-term resource monitoring group out of Lake City that focuses on the upper Mississippi, and then a group that works on the Watershed Health Assessment Framework, which is an online mapping tool. And if you haven't checked that out, I invite you to check it out. Just Google WAF, W-H-A-F. It's this amazing interface that has over 100 different data layers and metrics that have been built into this this mapping interface. So I invite you to check that out. So that's housed in our unit. And just a overview of our unit is the goal of our program is to study streams to better understand them and to ultimately restore stream health. So it's a very broad goal, but that's ultimately what we're aiming for. So the different areas of expertise that we have in our group of river science, fluvial geomorphology, which is a study of how rivers shape the land. We focus on stream habitat, like I said, mussel ecology and mussel propagation, fish biology, aquatic vegetation, water quality, topographic and bathymetric surveying, which is largely involved in our river restoration work. We have a statistician in our group, and we also have folks that are very savvy with GIS and creating GIS tools. This is kind of the main group of us that focuses on river restoration and river science and fluvial geomorphology. So the 4 of us on the top here, we're out of the Fergus Falls office. So this group is Neil Hogroods, our restoration consultant, Howard Fullhart, our river ecologist. He's pretty new to our program, but comes to us from DNR Fisheries and has been involved in various projects in the area. Amanda Hillman Roberts is our restoration coordinator, and I am the training and outreach coordinator. Down in central office, we have, or based at a central office in Southeast is Kevin Ziktovic is our river specialist, Mark Ellefson, another river specialist, and Lisha is our river ecologist. She does a lot of work on our fish habitat work. And I have to mention Luther Odland. He retired just over a year ago from the DNR and was the restoration consultant for our unit. But a lot of what I'm going to be showing you is a lot of his work. Him and Ian Chisholm were definitely the founders of this program and got this kind of work. We're definitely part of the group that got these kind of projects moving. So a lot of what I'm going to be showing as we go forward is Luther's work and some of his research while he was working for the DNR. So I'll jump into the effects of dams. Going to cover the various effects that dams have on our river systems. So first, I just want to put it in perspective. We have lots of dams out there on the landscape. In Minnesota, we have over 1,100 dams out there. Like around over 600 of them are publicly owned, and 300 plus of those are outlet dams owned by the state. And then as far as thinking about how tall these dams are, and that's concerned with when we're thinking about fish passage, is over 300 of these 330 of these dams are over 20 feet tall, which means they're probably a complete barrier to fish passage. Over 900 are several feet tall. And then we have lots of some shorter dams out there. So we do have a lot of dams in Minnesota, but just thinking about the whole network and river network out there. In the United States, there's over 91,000 dams throughout the United States, lots of really tall dams, over 50 feet tall. So just put it in perspective that our rivers have been pretty highly fragmented out there. And thinking about when these dams were constructed, this is just showing dams constructed per decade. The yellow is for the United States and the red is for the state of Minnesota. So just want you to note that our dams are being constructed starting as early back as in the 1800s, started picking up in the mid 1800s. And really peaked in the mid 1900s is when dam construction was kind of at its peak. For the state of Minnesota, peaking in the 1970s. But to put it in perspective as far as the fish community, these rivers starting in about the mid 1800s, in the mid 1800s, our river systems were blocked as the dams were being constructed throughout the river networks. Many of our rivers were blocked by this point, by the mid 1800s, and earliest fish survey data we have out there in our river networks is from the early 1900s. So we just need to keep it in perspective that we don't have, we don't really know what the fish community and what their distributions were prior to, before these river networks were dammed or starting to be dammed. So just thinking about dams, there's plenty of them out there across the landscape. As far as for the average, for the 94 plus dams, 1,000 dams out there across America, the average age is 59 years old. The typical design life is around 50 years for dams. So the statistic from 2020 is, over 85% of the dams will have exceeded their design life by 2020. So we're past that point. So a lot of the dams out there have exceeded their design life. These dams are evaluated, and over 4,000 of them are considered deficient, and of those 2,300 of those deficient dams are high hazard dams, which when they reach that high hazard category, which that means that if there is a failure, there is probable loss of life and also property damage downstream. The American Society of Engineers, they give grades for infrastructure across the United States, and the dams have gotten a grade of a D in 2021, and every year they've been evaluated, they've gotten the grade of a D. So these dams are in need of repair and upgrades and maintenance, the ones that are out there on the landscape. just in the last 40 years, over 1,000 dams have failed across the United States. So these are some pictures of some failures. We have Silver Lake failure in Michigan, 2003. The one on the right is another failure in Michigan. You can see here, hopefully you can see my cursor here, but the embankment failed, the earthen embankment, that's what's failed. Releasing all that water, and that caused the dam downstream to fail. So 11,000 people were evacuated, and it estimated over $250 million worth of property loss. And another big one in the news was out there in California. The tallest dam we have in the United States is 770 feet, the Oroville Dam, and that had issues in 2017 with really high flows, and that came up through the spillway and resulted in the evacuation of 188,000 people. So these dams are aging across the landscape. So let's jump into, I'll switch over to looking at the different effects of dams on rivers. So when you dam a river, basically you're converting the free-flowing dynamic river ecosystem into a lake-like ecosystem. And so when we do that, we're basically slowing the water down and trapping it behind the dam. And when you do that, you're also trapping all the sediment behind the dam. And these these reservoirs slowly fill with sediment. This is a picture of Rapidan Dam. It was built in 1910. This is this black and white photos from 1939. And parts of this reservoir, this dam is 85 feet tall, to put it in perspective. This is one of our tallest dams in Minnesota. So there's parts of this reservoir that are over 60 feet deep. But then when you look at this reservoir in 2015, you can see the reservoir is completely full of sediment. It doesn't look like a lake anymore or an impoundment. It looks more like a river network system through there. That reservoir is plumb full of sediment, and so that's over 60 feet of sediment behind that reservoir. It's estimated, this study from 2003, estimating that the world's reservoir storage is now 21% of that is now sediment, full of sediment. And by 2050, the world's reservoir storage will be 42% full of sediment. So across the globe, these reservoirs are filling with sediment. So that's a big issue when it comes to thinking about the river networks and the dams and the status of these dams. Another big problem is, so we have all this sedimentation happening upstream of the dam, but downstream we have degradation. So the sediment's being held behind the dam and building up, but downstream you have water flowing over the face of the dam, and that water has very little, if any, sediment in it. We call that sediment hungry water. So it has more erosive energy and more erosive power. So generally, if you look out there on the landscape, and you can tell that there's more erosion downstream of dams. So if you look at this picture with the yellow circle, that is the Minnesota River, and that's Minnesota Falls again. You can see how much wider the river is just downstream of that dam compared to upstream. Almost looks like it's twice again as wide downstream of that structure. And then also these two photos down here just show, sorry, trying to find my cursor, just show extreme erosion of those banks downstream of these structures. So those are some of the issues, just looking at the water and the sediment and how they're affected by dams. Another issue with dams is because of the way they're designed to hold back water, they convert free-flowing dynamic river ecosystems into more regulated lake-like ecosystems. So this is a graph I pulled from a source that some research that was done out in Montana, and just want you to note, just notice that this is showing discharge, and the black line is from discharge upstream of a large reservoir or an impoundment, and the gray line is downstream of that dam, of these two dams. So you can just see how different the hydrograph is upstream in the more natural setting versus downstream. So like you can see in the black, in the upper graph, there's a very, the peak flow, quick rain event that happened upstream, and that flow was attenuated in the reservoir and slowly released over time. The bottom river that's showing a hydrograph, this is a hydropower dam. So this is highly regulated, and for the discharges that's releasing out of the dam has to do with the power generation. So just not want you to notice here how much the downstream hydrograph is not similar to the natural hydrograph. So it doesn't mimic or kind of shadow what's happening upstream in those natural fluctuations in the river. So by changing those flows, this has an effect on the aquatic community. If you imagine the riverine community has adapted to these seasonal flows and these flows that happen after rain events. So this has an effect on the aquatic community. And sometimes these dams are regulated in a way that the riverbed downstream has the habitat is greatly altered because the water is either the water flows are really low, so that sometimes the river is completely dewatered downstream of dams. As you can imagine, that has a dramatic effect on the aquatic community. And because these dams are regulated for different human uses, they're not mimicking the natural dynamics of river ecosystems. So and so they can really decrease these flows really suddenly, and this can lead to like strandings or dewatering of the habitat. So like this is a picture of a northern pike that was in some real shallow water downstream of a dam where those flows were being regulated and very low. So it was being preyed upon by a heron. So you can imagine these fish species, if they're in these habitats that are dewatered and there's very low flow in the river channel, they're vulnerable to predation. The picture in the middle is from below Orwell Dam. That dam, they were doing some work on that dam, and we knew that the flows were going to be very low downstream. So we went down there and just looking at the response to the fish, the aquatic community. This is pictures that we took of mussels. So if you can kind of see the little lines, those are a couple of mussels that were in that little side pocket of water. But they kind of spin around, and you can tell they're trying to find their way to find deeper, safer water. So so in these conditions, these especially the mussel communities, these species can't move very fast, so they need time to react to the lowering of the water level, or they could get stranded. And if they're too dry and too warm, they can cause mortality, and then they're also vulnerable to predation. So that regulation of flow has a big impact on the community downstream. Something to think about with dams is there's the safety issue. These low-head dams are considered drowning machines. They're kind of deceiving. They don't look, you think you see a really tall dam, those look pretty scary and you want to stay away. But these low-head dams they can be deceiving. But they do create this what we call a hydraulic roller, which is this hydraulic roller that sets up behind the face of the dam. And as you can see, it pulls things back towards the face of the dam as it's spinning around. And this water is very, I'm going to back that video up. I'll show you this part later. But it's, yeah, you can get caught in that roller. And even, we've seen videos of, people that are stuck in that hydraulic roller in a boat with people trying to rescue those people. They also get pulled into the hydraulic roller. And a boat, the prop can't control the boat once they get too close to the face, because the water is so full of air that they can't get, the prop can't have control and get thrust. So these are very dangerous situations, and have to be very careful in any kind of a rescue situation. So this is, I'm going to show more about Midtown Dam later, but this is Midtown Dam in Fargo-Moorhead. And that site had at least 19 drowning deaths there due to that hydraulic roller. And so this can, definitely be an issue for people recreating on the river, people boating or kayaking, or even just, fishing around the face of these dams. And it also is a concern for the wildlife. This is a picture of over 300 pelicans that had actually drowned below the Marsh Lake Dam. These pelicans were going through a molting process, and they didn't have the ability to fly and get themselves out of that hydraulic roller. So it's definitely something to keep in. This is something that comes up when we're working on these projects. A lot of the communities or the dam owners are concerned about the dam safety, and that is something that we can does play a role in just determining what the future of these structures will be. Another consideration with dams is there's always the risk of failure. When dams, when rivers flood, a dam can fail. These are a variety of projects around, sites around the state where the dams failed, and these are all projects where we've been involved after the fact and done some kind of restoration or dam modification there. But yeah, there's always the risk of failure. As we know, we have more heavy rains are becoming more common and more intense across the state of Minnesota, and more localized. And also our rivers are transporting a lot more water than they did historically. Our landscape's been altered. We don't have the wetlands and the natural storage on the land. And we also have a lot of drainage networks and tiling out there on the landscape. So the water that, the rain that does fall on the landscape is quickly funneled into our rivers. So our rivers are much more flashy than they were historically, and they're carrying much larger volumes of water in a shorter amount of time. And add on top of that, our dams are growing older, like I showed earlier. And also as our population is increasing, as towns and cities are growing, and if they're downstream of any of these structures, then the potential for an incident is growing. So we have all these things to consider with these structures. Now I'm going to switch over to the effects that dams have specifically on the biology. I'm sure this group is familiar with the water quality issues. So basically when we're converting stopping containing the flow of the river into this reservoir. So all the river materials that are coming from upstream are being contained in the reservoir. So we have sediment accumulating in the reservoir, nutrients are accumulating, organic material coming from upstream. The water is held behind the dam, so it's static and it can become stratified, so the water is warmer. And all this can lead to algal blooms. As we know, especially where we have lots of agriculture in the landscape, we have a lot of nutrients coming from upstream. So we have basically eutrophication of these impoundments, which leads to these algal blooms, decomposition, low dissolved oxygen, and sometimes can lead to fish kills. This is a picture from Billsby Reservoir near Cannon Falls, which has frequent blue-green algae blooms because of the high nutrient inputs coming from upstream. Another concern with the biology is, I mentioned how earlier, there's sediment that builds up behind these dams. Well, all that sediment, it's building up, is depositing behind these dams, but it's burying very critical habitat. So I have this picture here of the state of Minnesota and the dams across the landscape. If you think about where dams were built, they were built, if they were built for hydropower or like flour mills, for power generation, for water supply, they tend to be built where the gradient of the river is steeper, so they can build up more head on the dam and have more energy or power for power production. So a lot of the dams out there on the landscape were built in these higher gradient reaches of the river, which is very critical habitat for our riverine species. We have a lot of species that specifically look for that habitat for spawning, and I'll go over that again here in a little bit. But so we have all these reservoirs out there that are full of sediment and filling full of sediment, and they've so between the impoundment of the reservoir and the sediment that's filling these reservoirs, they've completely buried this really critical habitat that we have out there. So this is a picture of a reservoir that was drained prior to the dam being modified, that had over 9 feet of sediment built up over the last several decades that dam existed. This is a picture from Lake Shady. After the dam failed, a head cut marched through the sediment that had deposited behind that dam. I'll talk about that project coming up. And then this is just showing you a picture. These two on the bottom right are from the Fergus Falls area, the Otter Tail River. Fergus Falls was founded here because it is Fergus Falls. The river had a lot of gradient here. I have over 100 feet of drop of river. So we also have 5 dams that are in our community. And I'm just want you to just trying to show here. This is one in kind of in the center of town, I guess I'll say. And there's another dam immediately not far upstream of this reservoir. But just showing here from 2009, you can see how much sediment had started filling this reservoir. And then this is picture from 2022. It's continuing to fill this reservoir. So, and even with a dam immediately upstream, but that dam and reservoir is completely full of sediment. So, so all that very critical habitat's been buried. It's either buried underwater, flooded underwater behind the dam, or being buried with the sediment. So this picture here is just showing, this is ideal. This picture on the bottom left is kind of your ideal typical riverine habitat. So I don't know if you can see that little darter peeking out there in the corner. So this is ideal habitat versus, you know, that what you typically find in a reservoir is very silty, muddy river bottom. And that's not ideal habitat. It's just the very tolerant species would exist in that kind of environment. So another thing to consider with impoundments and dams, that they tend to favor the more tolerant species, lake-oriented species, invasive and exotic species. I just have this picture on the right because this is the kind of habitat that our riverine species are looking for. They're looking for the deep pools or the rocky riffles or backwater habitat, the snags that provide cover. So this is the kind of habitat that our riverine species are looking for. They're not going to be found as commonly in the reservoirs or impoundments. So there's less competition or predation in these impoundments. A study in Wisconsin showed that, just comparing natural lakes to impoundments, that the impoundments were 200 to 300 times more likely to have invasive aquatic species. So it just kind of sets up the ideal situation for these invasive, very tolerant species. And the one I'm going to focus on going forward is the effects of dams they have on fish migration. And that's a lot of what our work's focusing on, is restoring fish migration. So as you can see, this is a picture of lake sturgeon that are hanging out below a dam. Of course, they're not able to swim around the dam, so they're not able to access their, get up to those spawning grounds that they're looking for. This is the kind of habitat, this is in the Roseau River, but this is the kind of habitat that our lake sturgeon species are looking for. They very rocky, very fast flowing habitat. They have very large eggs that need to be able to attach to the rocks, and need a lot of water flow to keep them aerated. This is some video from the outlet of Otter Tail Lake. There's a sturgeon there that's trying to maneuver its way over the crest of the dam. Wasn't quite able to make it. So yeah, I wanted to put this image in because I feel like it's just really important that we think of these river networks as arteries of life. And when we block these rivers, there is no other option for the fish community. They can't, you know, like birds that are migrating through, they can choose, you know, they can pick a variety of pathways, but the fish, they're completely locked into the river network. So when the river network is blocked, their migration is blocked. So I just wanted to highlight some of the reasons and why it's so important that the fish are able to migrate. One of the big reasons is for reproduction. Like really focus on the lake sturgeon, but we know many of our fish species will swim hundreds to even thousands of miles to reach the habitat that they're looking for. That's ideal situation for their eggs to thrive and survive. Another reason that fish migrate is for seasonal needs, especially up here in our northern latitudes. This is a video of from the Minnesota River in the middle of winter. They drilled a hole through the ice and put a camera down here, and what you're seeing is these very large fish are the large flathead catfish, and this is a channel catfish that's swimming over top. It's incredibly important that these species are able to find this overwintering habitat. You can imagine it's a very, winters are very harsh up here, and they need to find these deep resting pools where they can basically just kind of sleep, or they're kind of hibernating, and they're preserving their energy and their calories by hanging out in these deep pools. So it's very important if these, if they can't find access, if they don't have access to these overwintering areas, you can just imagine that they might not be able to survive. So generally, our river species up here in these latitudes tend to move downstream in the winter time, where the water is deeper. You have these deeper pools, and it's warmer than in the shallower areas. And in the spring, the springtime initiates upstream migration for these species to swim upstream for their spawning runs. Another reason that our fish migrate is their forage needs and their habitat needs change throughout their life. You can imagine these catfish, their forage, what they're eating is much different when they're very young and just a few inches long versus what they're eating at this stage. They can eat something up to a third of their size. So yeah, their forage needs change as they grow and change. And another thing with rivers is rivers are dynamic and they're changing. They go through drought cycles, flood cycles. There's stress in the winter. There can be chemical spills. And in all of these cases, the fish community needs to be able to recolonize after these kind of events. So this is some of the main reasons that our fish, it's absolutely essential that our fish community is able to migrate. And many of our species are, when they're spawning in the spring, they're looking for these specific high gradient, rocky kind of areas to spawn. So many of our sturgeon species, walleye, sauger, salmon and trout species, sucker species, darters, and minnows. These are all species that are looking specifically for these higher gradient areas. And I just included a map of the dams just to remind us that think about where all the dams were built, or many of our dams were built in those higher gradient areas. And so that habitat is definitely lacking, or it's been blocked. And just this, I find fascinating that it's amazing how far these species will travel. These are one-way migration distances that have been documented. If you think those fish are just traveling a couple miles upstream and downstream, they're traveling hundreds of miles. So I just find this fascinating. So it's really important that these river networks, these arteries, are open for fish passage. And another really important piece is that the mussel community. So in case you don't know, our mussel community, all of our native mussels in Minnesota require a fish host to complete their life cycle. This is a plain pocketbook. This is a female that she's full of Glaucidia here, so she's trying to lure in some either like bluegill, smallmouth bass, or walleye. And both here for the fish, and leaves the Glaucidia, which are a little Pac-Man, and they attach to the gills of the fish. The little tiny baby mussels go through kind of a what's the word I'm looking for? Where they go through kind of a metamorphosis on the gills of the fish, and with a couple weeks later, they drop off onto the riverbed and start their life on the riverbed. So this is an amazing evolution of of these mussels. If they didn't have this link to the fish, there would be no way for them to recolonize upstream. So they've developed these amazing lures to draw on the fish to come and take a bite. So I would invite you to Google freshwater mussel mantle displays. It's amazing, the different lures that have been these species have evolved to trick these fish. And this is just to show that this is the mussel community in the Ottertail River. This is just to point out that some of our mussels only use one type of fish, one species of fish host. So if you imagine if these different species of mussels can only rely on one species of fish to complete their life cycle, they are intricately linked to the ability of these fish to move and migrate and thrive. So mussels are incredibly important to our freshwater ecosystems. They filter the water, they provide substrate. So it's important to have a healthy freshwater, a healthy mussel community out there. And just wanted to highlight here the loss of freshwater biodiversity. So our freshwater ecosystems are at the forefront of the global diversity crisis. So freshwater ecosystems have more declining and more extinct species than terrestrial or marine environments. So nearly 1/3 of all of our freshwater fish on the globe are threatened with extinction. So to keep in mind just what kind of condition our freshwater ecosystems are in. Lake sturgeon, or sorry, sturgeon, there's 27 different species around the globe, and 85% of those are at risk of extinction. Our freshwater mussels, 72% of them in North America are at risk of extinction. In Minnesota, 31 of our 51 species are listed, meaning they're endangered, threatened, or special concern. And the research and the scientific community out there, it's very clear that dam construction is one of the most obvious causes of extirpation and extinction of freshwater species. So we can have a huge impact on freshwater biodiversity by just simply by reconnecting these rivers. So that's the goal of these projects, is restoring freshwater connectivity and ultimately restoring freshwater biodiversity. And we're thinking of the fishes of Minnesota, of thinking of, we have over 130 different species of fish in Minnesota and 50 some species of mussels. Okay, so these are the different strategies that we use for when we're looking at dams across the landscape and exploring options of what to do with these structures. So as you can see, dam removal, this is the most preferred and has the most benefit to the river, of course, by just simply removing the structure and completely restoring the geomorphic and the ecological processes, restoring habitat, removing the safety issues, restoring passage. This has the most benefit to the riverine community. So I'm just going to show you a few examples. This is Minnesota Falls. This dam is on the Minnesota River. This is showing you the Minnesota River. This is the longest free-flowing stretch of river we have in the state of Minnesota, 254 miles. So Minnesota Falls was the first barrier. It's a complete barrier. It was a complete barrier, 18 feet high. It had inundated some rapids and falls behind the dam. We know there's at least 98 species of fish in this watershed, and this was the upstream limit of 37 of those species. So these species of fish were found nowhere upstream. This dam was owned by Xcel Energy. It was for hydropower, which was retired in 1958. This was considered a high hazard dam, and it had significant structural deficiencies. So the company needed to decide what to do with the structure. Unfortunately, one of their employees drowned while trying to remove debris from the debris racks. So when the company was deciding what to do, they were given an estimate of $5 to $7 million to repair and upgrade this dam. But they just chose to do full dam removal at a cost of $2 million. It was removed in January of 2013. This was a full removal, and there was some excavation of sediment from behind the dam that was removed and taken off site. So this completely restored Minnesota Falls and several other rapids upstream. And of those 37 missing species that were not found anywhere upstream of Minnesota Falls, 15 of those species have returned so far. And this is very limited data. This is a hard stretch of river to sample, and it's a fairly recent removal. But of these species that have returned, 5 of these are either threatened, special concern, or endangered. So that's a pretty exciting project there that's had dramatic improvement to the fish community. Here's another full removal with Sandstone Dam on the Kettle River. This one was removed in 1995. It restored Big Spring Falls. which was upstream. This was the upstream limit. So there was 24 species that were absent upstream of this barrier. And since removal, we know that at least 17 of those species have returned. I have to go quickly. Got a lot to cover. So another strategy, so dam removal is the most preferred option, completely removing the dam and completely restoring the river. But as you can imagine, this is kind of a hard, difficult option that unfortunately we're not able to carry out that option. So another option that we have is the Rock Arch Rapids. And this is a design that was developed by Luther Odland, and I'll show the design here on the next slide. But the Rock Arch Rapids this is just showing that video of how it affects the safety issue. It removes that, completely removes the hydraulic roller. But yeah, so there's these benefits, and we'll talk about those as we go through these projects, these Rock Arch Rapids projects. So like I said, this Rock Arch Rapids was designed by Luther Odland, and with his fisheries background, it was very important that this conceptual design accommodates all migrating species. So all fish species of all sizes and all of the time. That's one of the goals of these projects. Another goal is that it's provides a seamless transition between the river and the fishway. It should feel pretty natural for the fish community. There's no operation of these needed on these structures, and there's little or no maintenance needed. These structures provide some type of this riverine habitat. You know, like I talked, many of these structures were built where covering up these higher gradient areas. So by creating this habitat, this creates these little pockets of kind of this higher gradient spawning areas for these fish. And also another goal is that we don't want these structures to prevent or they create some type of bottleneck. It would cause problems as far as predation or disease transmission. So those are the goals of these projects. This is what a Rock Arch Rapids looks like conceptually. This is an example where the dam is maintained. So for example, many of our lake outlet Rock Arch Rapids are constructed this way, where the crest of the Rock Arch Rapids is the same height as the crest of the dam. So yeah, basically it's just a big rock ramp, and that rock ramp is spread out behind the face of the dam. And on that rock ramp, we build these weirs, and these are, you see they're arch-shaped weirs. They're arched upstream into the flow. So these arches they're made of very large boulders, and you can see it doesn't show up well here, but the middle of the arch is set lower than the arms of the arch, so they increase in elevation as you move towards the bank. So the way the arches are designed is they focus all the flow to the center of the channel. And also there's gaps in those boulders, and those are for fish passage. So we have larger gaps towards the center of the channel for the larger species, and then the gaps kind of get smaller as you move towards the banks. And that's so there's lower velocities for our slower swimming species. And then there's also these pools in between the weirs. Those are resting pools for the fish that are migrating through. Each weir we try to have less than this shows 0.7 feet, but we try to aim for less than half a foot of drop per weir. And the overall goal is to have a slope of around 3%. That's for the base center line of the Rock Arch Rapids. Here's another example showing where the dam might, in a case where the dam might be removed, but the crest of the Rock Arch Rapids is the same height as the crest of the dam, but it's just the crest is moved upstream. And this is sometimes we do this when there's no room downstream, or there's such a large scour pool downstream that the Rock Arch Rapids is slid upstream. And you need enough room to accommodate that head loss that they're designing for. So those are a couple different ways that this Rock Arch Rapids is constructed. Here's some of them out on the landscape, a variety of different sizes and slopes. Like I said, we try to design for this 3% slope is ideal, 3% and under. Let's see. I'm just going to show you a couple examples of these rock arch rapids out there. This is Midtown Dam. This is a very important project. This is the first rock arch rapids that Luther was involved in. This is on the Red River of the North in Fargo-Moorhead. This dam was a water supply, created water supply for the 19 deaths at the site. So obviously the community was very concerned about the safety issue here. So this gave Luther the chance to promote this idea of a rock arch rapids, where he could it would maintain the height of the dam, maintain that pool behind the dam, so it's a full pool rock arch rapids. But it would eliminate that hydraulic roller and that safety risk, and it would also provide fish passage. So this happened in 1999. It's constructed, and the community's been pretty happy with it. The whitewater people like to come out here kayaking, and you know, the Red River in the north is very flat, so a little spot with some whitewater is pretty exciting. But what's exciting about this project is it kind of was the beginning of this larger effort we call it Reconnecting the Red. So what I'm trying to show here in this graph is where the rivers are green. Those rivers are you know, passable by fish. So those structures highlighted in green, those dams have been modified, so they are passable by fish. The ones that are red are barriers, and the ones that are yellow, those are they're low head dams, so they're passable sometimes parts of the year during higher flow events. So what you'll notice is the Red River of the North, which is over here along the border of Minnesota and North Dakota, that's all green. So it's pretty exciting. The Red River of the North, all those dams have been modified for fish passage. The last one is Drayton Dam, which is up here. This is the last dam that's going to be modified, and that's going to be converted into a rock arch rapids this summer. They've actually started the drawdown process on that, so they can do construction this summer. So it's incredibly exciting that the Red River of North has been is now not free flowing, but it's open for fish passage, and also a lot of these tributaries. So like the Roseau River, the Middle, Red Lake, Sandhill, the Wild Rice, Buffalo, and Otter Tail rivers have all been connected to scan ahead. This is trying to show the topography. The goal is to get these rivers so that they're passable all the way up to the Beech Ridge area. And that Beech Ridge is where that critical steeper gradient habitat is. And the goal here is for reconnecting the rivers for lake sturgeon. And of course, the whole fish community, but it's focusing also, you know, we can use kind of the lake sturgeons are keystone species. They were completely extirpated from the Red River of the North, and with stocking efforts and opening up these rivers, especially up to these critical spawning grounds in the Beech Ridge areas. We just last year saw reproduction out on the Otter Tail River. So that's very exciting. We're hoping the goal of this Reconnecting the Red is to have a naturally reproducing and sustained lake sturgeon population out there. So yeah, so that's a really cool effort in the Red River of the North. Here we'll move east to the Willow River Dam. This dam failed in 2016 after a rain event. There's one known drowning death here. This is a full pool rock arch rapids that was constructed. So the full height of the dam was completely removed, but the height was replaced with the rock arch rapids. Here's another example, Lake Shady down in southeast Minnesota. This dam failed in 2010. In this case, the dam was removed and the rock arch rapids was constructed to a height that to connect the upstream part so the height of the crest of the dam is at the height of the reservoir sediment. So and then the channel was excavated through that reservoir sediment, and that reservoir sediment is now the new floodplain for the river. So and these are in cases, you know, these reservoirs are full of sediment, and there'd be no point in completely dredging and moving all that sediment. So in these cases like this, we just excavate and build a new channel in that reservoir sediment and just keep the sediment there in place. But we need that rock arch rapids to make up that head difference between the height of the river downstream to the height of the new sediment level. And that's what those, the goal of those rock arch rapids. And we use these for lake outlets. This is the Knutson Dam on the outlet of Cass Lake. This is a lake that was owned by the Forest Service. This dam was, so this dam was completely removed. You can see it was in pretty rough shape, completely removed and replaced with the rock arch rapids. And it was designed in a way that the crest of the dam is the same as the crest of the rock arch rapids. And this is our first project on the Mississippi River. This one has some cool video. Just wanted to show. Turn the volume off. Walking through the river, the rock arch rapids. And some of these, they design in a low flow channel at the center of the channel, which is great for recreation and for kayaking through. So you can see these provide some whitewater recreation opportunity. And then we were out there last spring, and we saw a bunch of pelicans out there hanging out and fishing on the rapids. So that was pretty cool. They obviously know that's where the fish are, and they're hanging out. This is Fish Lake Outlet Dam on the Pelican River. This one you can see again, the dam was in pretty rough shape. So that one was modified into a rapids. And I just wanted to show here, this is white suckers that are, so this is the same day that these videos are taken. You can tell the project was still very new, just finishing it up. And as it was being constructed, the fish were moving in, kind of as you build it, they will come kind of vibe. So the white suckers were coming in and spawning in the rapids. This just shows video of underwater. I think I'm going to skip that just to have more time, but it shows the suckers underwater kind of in spawning activity. Sorry, so let's go. I'll keep going. So the last option that we have is the bypass fishway, which is basically just a miniature river that's working. Goes around the crest of the dam. And we use this option where there's obviously no option for dam removal or space for modification. And again, this one has the same goals where the goal of this is it's a little miniature river, but we want to make sure it can accommodate all the variety of fish species, the different sizes, swimming capabilities, and also to provide habitat. So this one obviously doesn't have all the same benefits as full dam removal. It does not address the safety issues with the dam, but it does address fish passage, and it does provide a little short reach of habitat, steeper gradient habitat. This is the diversion dam fishway on the Otter Tail River. Here I'm showing it in the graph, or sorry, in this picture. If you can't see it, this is showing the fishway, and it goes through the embankment using a culvert. So I was out there one day with our interns, showing them some of our projects, and just happened to be out there at the same time that this through the rapids. This fishway has about 8 feet of fall and a slope of about 4%. But this is our sturgeon in diversion video. So the sturgeon is looking for its way to get through this weir. After this video, Luther made it a point to go out there, and they did some other minor adjustments of the gapping on the weirs. He wanted to make sure that there was enough gaps for these larger species to make their way through the fishway. But we have a lot of fish data from this fishway that we have documented all the variety of fish passage. The fish that did make their way up through the fishway, it provided the perfect opportunity to document the fish that were coming through. So we've done over, sorry, I'm really close to the end here. So we have over, that we know of 85 different projects out there on the landscape. So we're definitely having an impact out there. This is just dam related projects. This isn't showing all the culvert upgrades and other connectivity projects that are out there. And just really quickly, sorry, didn't mean to go over time. But this is some research that Luther's been doing, looking at the barrier effects on the native fish of Minnesota. He basically looked at fish data from 32 barriers around the state. And just for the interest of time, I'm just gonna skip ahead. You can check out, it's available on this website. But of these 33 barriers, he looked at the fish community upstream versus downstream of these barriers. And we broke it down into these categories of whether, like, a complete barrier is a very tall dam that's never passable. But of the 22 fish barriers, and looking at that, the fish data, looking at what species are downstream versus what were found upstream. Let's see. An average for the 22 complete barriers, an average 45% of the fish community was missing or absent upstream of these complete barriers. 27% of the fish community was missing or absent above the 9 near complete barriers. 17% above the 2 moderate barriers. So even though they flood out quite often, they're still impacting the fish community. So the overall average for the 33 barriers is almost 40% of the fish community is missing above these barriers. And just I'll quickly jump to this, but of those 33 barriers, 15 of those have been modified or for fish passage. And when you look at the fish community that has returned after removal, an average of 73% of those fish have returned after removal. So this is very exciting. This is proof and evidence, from the data showing that these dams do have a dramatic effect on the fish community, but when they are modified or removed, it does have a huge impact. And the fish will return, and with the fish, they will also help the mussel community. There's this resource out there, Are Reconnecting Rivers. It's a little dated, but if you're interested in this kind of work, that's there. And then I'll leave it at this image. This is the goal. This is why we do this work, is for biodiversity, fish biodiversity and mussel biodiversity. So this is what we're aiming for, is increasing that biodiversity out there on the landscape. So sorry, I went over. Yeah, any questions?
All right, well, thank you, Amy. That was a lot of really interesting and great information, and a lot to get through. So I can sympathize.
I'm not hearing you, Brooke.
Oh, maybe it's something. Let's see. I'll type you a chat. Something with your audio because of the videos. Maybe you turned down the volume. Are you hearing me now, Amy? Nope. Is everybody else hearing me?
Yes, I can hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Let me chat her. I think she did something with sound during one of those videos. I'm guessing that's the problem there. Hopefully she's seeing the chats. Right. Are you able to hear me now, Amy? Oh, maybe not. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay, okay, good.
I'm sorry, I have no idea what happened there. Sorry.
Sure, not a problem. So we do have a few questions in the chat if you wanted to take a few minutes.
Yes.
Are you able
Yep.
to see the chat, or did you want me to read those for you?
Yeah, I can. Yep. Let's start at the top. Does the 2 million for removal of Minnesota Falls include any restoration beside the sediment removal? The 2 million, I know that was specifically for the actual removal of the structure, and that did include, I do believe that included the sediment removal. So the total cost for the removal and some of the excavation upstream of the structure. There's that question. Why were so many dams constructed in the 50s and 60s? I do know that there was a big push across probably the Midwest in response to the 30s when we had those the severe drought. A lot of the lake outlet dams were constructed over that time frame. They in response to that drought period, and another reason for that in that time frame was to basically give people jobs, to give people something, the the construction crew, to provide employment and create these structures out there on the landscape in response to another large, long drought event is the way I understand it. Do you know what Michigan's plan is for the Edenville Dam following the breach? From what I read on that one's been completely, that dam was completely rebuilt and built back up to the way it was prior to the failure. So that one, I don't think there was ever any consideration to do any kind of a modification on that site. I'm not too familiar with the state of Michigan. So someone mentions, we have it mentioned here, that for the Otter Tail River watershed, there's 8 priority dams for removal and replacement in the next 10 years. 4 on the Pelican and 4 on the Otter Tail. And yes, so I would have liked to have time to show you, there are 4 outlet dams on the Otter Tail River being modified this summer. They're working on Little Pine right now. That one's actually happening right now as we speak. Big Pine is to be modified. Rush Lake and Otter Tail Lake are going to all be modified into Rock Arch Rapids this summer. So that's a pretty exciting project. And another one in the Pelican River, which would have been cool to show you, is yeah, that one's happening right now too. In Pelican Rapids, that dam is going through, it's been being completely removed, being replaced with the Rock Arch Rapids. It's not being rebuilt to full pool. They did lower the pool level slightly, somewhat behind the dam. They did want to retain some part of the reservoir behind that structure. So that one's happening right now. You might have seen it in the news. It was a big deal. There's a big statue of a pelican that had to be moved. But yeah, that one's happening right now. So the Pelican River, there's only one dam downstream. It's a small privately owned dam that we're hoping that we can keep working with the owner of that one. And it would be really exciting to have the Pelican River completely open for fish passage. What are the main roadblocks to removing dams? So these are very challenging projects. One of the big roadblocks is just that human connection to history and not wanting to see change. You know, a lot of the people have a personal connection and they're used to seeing that structure on the landscape, and it's you know, status quo is a lot easier than change. So that's when we a lot of these projects take many years from beginning to end, and learning from Luther, it seemed like the best way was to, you know, reach out to a community and start talking to those involved and just kind of plant the seed of this is an option. And we kind of have to plant the seed and let the community have some time to think about it. And now that we have so many more of these projects out there on the landscape, you can say, we can show these videos and show these examples, or say, you know, there's just a modification just over in the next town. So we do have that option now where people can, you know, if they can go check out these other projects, and we can show the successes and all the benefits, you know, the whitewater is a kind of can be a draw in some communities. The fish passage, we feel like In some places, it would be such a draw to the community to have a place where you could come, especially lake sturgeon. If you could come to a spot where there's lake sturgeon spawning in a rapids and you could come watch that, that would be really cool. And I think a big draw for the community. So yeah, one of the big roadblocks is just getting the community open to the idea of not just simply replacing the structure, especially where it's there's been a failure. Hopefully I answered that okay. What is the status of Rapidan Dam? There is they're starting the conversation of what to do with that structure. Like it's a very, very tall structure, a lot of sediment behind it. Luther has provided a conceptual design of how you could do a stepped lowering of that crest, and there is a way to hold the sediment back and put in a series of rapids in that footprint of the dam. There has been some public meetings, but Rapidan, there's like a business, they sell pies and stuff right there next to Rapidan, and they're very against the removal of the structure. So it's again one of those where kind of start introducing it to the community, have several public meetings, but there's conversation around that project. I don't know if there's anybody from our group that would want to add to that. So the conversation has started. They realize that they do need to make a decision on Rapidan, but that one would be incredible if we could get fish passage. That's obviously a big barrier for fish passage.
I could add to that, Amy. This is Neil Huggerud. They also didn't submit for FERC relicensing for the hydropower. That's a recent development. So that's one step closer to getting the conversation of what to do with the dam. As Amy said, there's a lot of opposition in the area, but there's also a lot of groups that are getting more involved, like the kayaking groups, even the biking groups. One of the big issues is a bike trail goes right through the dam footprint right now, but they've also started to come around to the idea that something should be done there. A big hurdle on that one, as well as the newer bridge that's upstream of the dam doesn't have pilings deep enough to have the dam removed. So that bridge would have to be replaced, which adds to the cost of already a really costly project. But the feasibility study has a 10-year drawdown plan, where a 10-year plan of completing the project, where you'd need to draw it down. Some of the sediment would have to be removed in a wedge to allow the rock ramp to be put in. And you also would need that sediment to consolidate slowly. I mean, 85 feet is a lot to take down. So it'd have to be done in stages over a series of years, and then reassessed after each drawdown. So it would be a very large project, probably, and probably take a decade with the timeline that the feasibility study showed.
Thanks, Neil. Did you want me to keep going with these questions?
I think as long as we still have folks sticking around, let's go for it.
All right. Okay, is there talk about movement of invasives once a dam is removed? Yes, that does come up in these discussions and considerations. We really encourage the idea that the fundamentals that when a structure is removed and you open up the river and you have more fish and you have more of the native fish species, we feel like the more native species you have in the community, the more natural predation and competition that you have with these invasive species. And also you're removing this this stretch of the river that's more, it's more preferred habitat, sometimes more preferred habitat for like invasive species like carp. So, yes, it is part of the conversation and it is a concern, but we feel like just by restoring the native fish community, restoring fish process, the riverine processes, that the benefits of dam removal and return of more native fish biodiversity outweighs the risk of invasive species that might make, if that barrier was many of the barriers that were built out there were carp barriers, and the goal was to keep common carp out. But when you look out there across the landscape, there is many of these places where there's these carp barriers, there's plenty of carp already upstream. So we feel like by removing these barriers, you can restore the more natural process and the native riverine biodiversity. Let's see. How involved is the DNR with the St. Anthony Falls discussions, and are there examples of larger dam removals like that in other states? Are you still on, Neil? I'm not sure how to answer that with the St. Anthony Falls. Or Amanda, or
Sure, I can try, Amy. We have
thanks, Neil.
Mike Davis that is a long time has worked with us on mussel issues, but he's also been on many discussions on what's called Restore the Gorge in the Twin Cities, which involves the St. Anthony Falls Dam, and been many discussions on what to do, whether to remove it, to restore the falls. He has quite a long presentation that he's given over the years showing the pros and cons of retaining and what it would be like to take it out and what kind of recreation could be done there. So I won't try reproduce any of that, but yeah, it's been discussed, and there's people in our group that worked on that for a number decades now. So in the discussions of what to do there.
And thinking about all the benefits it would have for the native mussel community and the fish community, right, Neil?
Yeah, and of course, a lot of the talk is around invasive species. It was a natural barrier that kept any invasive species from going upstream, even prior to the dam being built. So that's in the discussion as well, that it's a natural barrier. And then the discussion that how far back would have it eroded by now, because it was a very erodible site as well. The bedrock there is very erodible. So those are some of the issues that's been discussed over the years, and it's still in discussion of what to do long term. But it's one of those projects that I mean, with a large metropolitan area, it's going to be one of those that takes a lot of discussion and before final solutions ever comes to bear on that one. So
yeah, this question asked about larger dam removals. Neil, can you speak to some of the projects that we know Luther's been involved in some very large projects out on the East Coast, I'm just thinking of in other states.
yeah, he's done quite a few on the Cape Fear area. Those are very large dams involving Army Corps projects, some really large rock arch rapids that survived. I think the Cape Fear one had 2 hurricanes go over it. So you imagine the flood events that they had to survive. So it's part of the rock arch rapids design, especially when water is contained due to the placement of the dam and the valley that river sits in, is you have to also look at the largest events in design so that rock arch rapids doesn't move in even the largest known events. So that's why you see these very large rocks being used. I mean, a lot of people, when they see these the first time, they see them as very engineered looking. We try to make them look as natural as possible. Some of the newer designs don't have arches necessarily that you see. They're more of a wave design. That Fish Lake one that Amy showed had that design. It's harder to see from that angle, but it has a double wave so that you get larger pools between the weirs, and there's not that steady arc that you see on the other ones. It also helps for sturgeon passage. Sturgeon are longer bodied fish, need bigger pools for resting area. Larger gaps in those weirs are necessary, at least a 2-foot gap. Because if you think about it, that fish body size, the wave angle of that fish having to push itself through when it's really working hard has to be quite large. So that then has to be taken into account on the hydraulics of that design, so that you can accommodate gaps of 2-foot size, and putting them in multiple spots, like the center and on the outer edges, so that you can have those fish get through at different flows. So larger rivers have larger issues and a lot more details that need to be taken into account. And especially a lot of times the larger rivers are near metropolitan areas. So you also have things like we incorporate fishing piers, flat rocks that are put in upstream and downstream so that people can fish above the rapids in a scour pool that forms below the rapids. So there's social things that have to be taken into account. And Amy talked about the low flow channel. So with the larger fluctuations in our rivers as well, in many areas, we put a low flow channel so that water isn't spread out over these large arcing weirs. So you need to contain that flow. So you have depth of flow for fish passage as well as canoeists and kayakers. So they have a way through it even in the later summer and fall flow periods. So.
Cool. Thank you, Neil. Not sure what the question is here. How would the rock arches for flood control? Question is there.
So this is
Oh.
Aida Mendez. I asked that question. So I think that some of the dams are for flood control. So how does this would compare to that? Just to regulate flow in the river, just to prevent flooding. That's what I'm asking.
Neil, are you still on?
Sure, you want me?